Welcome to the MongoDB Customer Spotlight Interviews, ANZ Series.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the MongoDB ANZ Customer Interview Series. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rob Postill. Rob, you're the Chief Technology Officer for Ynomia, and Ynomia is a construction tech startup based out of Melbourne. Could you share a little bit more about how long Ynomia has been around and a little bit around your role as a CTO in an up-and-coming business like Ynomia?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. We started out in 2018, and we're a construction tech company, which means that we try and help the construction industry build buildings. There are a lot of problems and challenges in construction. Construction as an industry has relatively low productivity rates and has traditionally been really badly served by technology. And there are low levels of R&D leading to low levels of innovation in the space. The notable quotable is that in construction, the productivity is down there with hunting and fishing as one of the least productive industries per head of capita in the entire world. It's a space that's ripe for people to come in and really help. And at Ynomia, we're looking to bring major productivity gains to the construction industry. And that really revolves around trying to help the project teams for a building come together and understand what they need to do.
And as a CTO, I imagine you're on the forefront of, solving this problem from a technical perspective. And, we'll get into that here in a little bit. I had the pleasure of speaking with Matt Barbuto, your CEO and co-founder, a handful of times over the last few months. And he did share with me, kind of an interesting story around just the idea. How was Ynomia? How did it come about a couple of years ago? Could you share a little context with us on that?
Sure. So actually, there are three co-founders, and I came a little bit later into the story, but Matt went to a CSIRO demo event. So like CSIRO, it's quite an interesting thing. They obviously have a lot of researchers. They're producing a lot of intellectual property every year, but they have this real issue with being able to sell that intellectual property. They've been part inventors of Wi-Fi. Like they feel a real responsibility to get their technology and their ideas out there. And so Matt had seen this demonstration of a technology we call BLEAT, which is Bluetooth Low Energy Aware Tracking. And the BLEAT technology allows you to basically track the location of things in areas where you couldn't normally do that. And he started talking with the other two co-founders, Matt Lickwa and Adam Jago, and Adam particularly has had a long history in the construction industry, and they started talking about some of the challenges in the construction industry, and Matt was talking about the BLEAT technology, and they kind of went, hang on a minute, there is like a really solid use case for this awesome radio technology inside construction. And so the three of them basically got together and then started talking to CSIRO, and we're fortunate enough, you'd like to think it was good management, not good luck, but they were fortunate enough to be able to negotiate with CSIRO an R&D deal and a licensing deal for the BLEAT technology. And we found a really valuable lighthouse customer in ProBuild, who are one of the big general contractors. And the rest is history.
That's really interesting. Okay, so you're working with CSIRO, you're leveraging this BLEAT technology. You talked about helping people build buildings. You mentioned ProBuild, one of the first lighthouse customers. So maybe we start there for a minute, and let's just talk about it. So your target customer audience, who are they, and what specifically are you solving for them?
The main people that we sell to are general contractors. They're effectively the primary source of revenue. But obviously, you're trying to work across the entire supply chain. And the thing is, when you go to a construction project office, it's quite a confronting experience as a technologist because there is so much paper. Like it's an immense amount of paper compared to what we're used to in the modern office. And there are all these diagrams and models and plans for how the building is going to get built. But there's also all this progress tracking that needs to occur and all this chasing down of massive amounts of information across the supply chain and within the construction site itself. And if you talk about like even at the bottom end of what we sell, which is kind of 20, 30 story buildings, you're talking about projects that can be millions of dollars a month, tracked mostly by pieces of paper on a wall.
I can picture it.
It's hard not to kind of talk about it without kind of getting a little bit emotional about it. You kind of go to this place and you kind of go, how do you manage to do this? Because suddenly what happens is this complete fog descends. Like the architect is designing the building, and then once everybody agrees that this is a building that wants to get built and the money gets found, what happens is effectively you turn off the visibility up until the point where you get to the end of the project and the building is built. So all that time in between the design having happened and the building actually being commissioned and put into operation is really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why construction is a difficult industry to be in, is because it's hard to understand what's going on, the amount of collaboration that needs to occur, right? Like you need to be able to kind of say, well, like if I'm an electrician, like when am I coming to the building? What's the appropriate floor that I'm working on? What piece of the building am I working on? And if you can't accurately and usefully tell people what's going on, it's a mess. And it ends up being quite a stressful industry because of that as well.
Well, I'm just sitting here imagining it. You have the foreman or whoever walking up and down the 20, 30 floors, the job site, trying to figure out what's going on. People back in probably some little tiny office somewhere with all kinds of things slapped up on the wall, trying to figure out where shipments are. When's this contractor coming in versus this one? Is that done? Did they do it right? I'm imagining this perfect storm or what you call the fog. And so all of that probably translates into, I'd imagine, projects taking longer or not getting done properly. So we're probably talking about some serious timing implications and some money implications, I'd have to imagine, that you're helping solve.
Absolutely. Like one of the projects that we worked on, that project was spending, I think, of the order of $20 million a month at peak.
Wow.
So there's this massive outflow of money. And one of the first things that we picked to track, which is facades, the glass facades that go on the side of a modern building. Those facades, I think you're talking about 30% of the overall project cost. So if you're talking about, a $700 million project, 30% of that is tied up with those facades. And those facades are generally produced in China. Like it's a globalized supply chain. So once the facades, which are each, they're 50, 100 kilos of glass and steel. Once each one's produced, they'll go on a boat, and that boat may take 10, 12 weeks to get here. And you've got the painter, the plasterer, the plumber, the electrician, all kind of waiting for those glass facades to be put onto the building, and therefore it being safe enough for them to work within. So if you get it wrong and you lose it. And the funny thing is, like, these facades are like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Like you've got to put them on in order. You can't kind of go, I've got level 7 panel number 33. I'm just going to stick that on and not worry about any of the rest of level 7. You've got to put it all on in order. Then what happens is that effectively the other trades can't start, and then they charge you money, right? Like, because they're saying, well, like, you booked me from work to be here on Monday and there's no work here. So yeah, like the project goes from okay to being like deep in the red very, very quickly. That's one of a number of examples.
Yeah. Rob, I mean, this honestly sounds quite, not to be cavalier about it, but man, it's pretty obvious, right? Like this is a problem. Why on earth hasn't this been solved a decade ago? It's easy, right? You just throw a bunch of computers in an environment, you track it all, you get it all squared away, like you deal with the changes and you move on, right? Seems pretty straightforward.
I think if you'd said that in front of my team, you might have got some pitchforks.
So give us the real scoop. What's really going on?
So the reality is that it is, firstly, the very nature of it is massively dynamic. You have got a building that is being built. So so many of the things that you think should be there are not there, right? Like there's no electricity because there's no power. It hasn't been built yet. The reality of the environment is that it's hostile to things like GPS and mobile phone reception because you've got a lot of Faraday cages, you've got a lot of water and dust and those kind of things around there. And that also extends generally to computers. Like you can't have somebody wandering around a construction site with like a laptop. It'll just get trashed. So that makes it hard to put computers into the environment. And then secondarily, all the things that you're trying to collect are like you're trying to work with people who have got jobs and are under time pressure already. And they're not like office workers. They don't have that kind of day-to-day familiarity with computers. So they tend to be much more practical and functional users of computers. That means that therefore, like the group of people that you're targeting are different to what you would targeting in, say, finance or marketing. And it means when you add the layer and the users, so you lay the environment and the users together, and you also end up in a situation where, because of how difficult it has been to collect the information, people aren't often used to sharing the information either. They're not used to kind of saying, well, I will transparently show you my run rate of manufacture and production, because it's not a question that you've been able to answer effectively, so why ask it? That means that it becomes this actually really difficult set of constraints that you have to kind of unbundle. And really, up until quite recently, we just haven't had the computing technology there to be able to do it.
Yeah, so if I hear you right, you have a number of environmental obstacles, right? From the job construction site, it's probably not ideal to store a whole bunch of equipment and hardware and computers and all these, sensors and things like that. You might not have any connectivity because there might not be power. So you have a number of environmental things. You have a number of probably challenges that have just been built up historically, right? That people aren't used to using this stuff. They don't even know how to interpret data or give the right data or trust the data. And also I'd have to imagine that, just there's a lot of different types of things that you'd want to track if you were going to do it right. Like you mentioned in some of your other examples, you have contractors and shipments and, when is this piece here versus that's there, so it's safe to move here. And there's just a lot of different kind of disparate things going on, and the environment's changing at all times. So it seems like a quite unique and challenging set of circumstances, which kind of leads me into, thinking about how you use MongoDB to solve a problem like this. So from what I understand, like I said, I had several conversations with Matt, one of the co-founders. He kind of jokingly told me at one point, he said, hey, we didn't actually pick MongoDB. That was CSRIO, and they have a really great track record of tech decisions, like you said, right? It's their strong suit, but maybe not monetizing is the strong suit. So they kind of picked that first tech stack for you. They said, hey, MongoDB makes a heck of a lot of sense from what we know, what you want to build here. But what Matt told me is he said, well, I've known Rob and, he's this new CTO, kind of want to make his own mark. He fully expected you to come in and say, like, we're going cloud native database, meaning, Microsoft Cosmos DB, because you guys partner with Microsoft in a really special way. Or he even said, man, he might consider going AWS. I know he's a big AWS guy. And so, hey, I'm just reporting the news here. I'm making no judgments, but I'd love to hear a little bit more around that story, around the MongoDB, the database story there, if there is one.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I rolled up, CSIRO said to me quite clearly and quite correctly, they're researchers by nature. They don't run large technology projects for people. By and large, that's not where they would consider their sweet spot. And so, yeah, I think everybody was expecting when I arrived for me to say, oh, well, like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'd previously worked with a lot of top end of town stuff, SQL Server and Oracle and databases like that. I did a stint for a BI consultancy. So I kind of had a reasonable idea of what was going to happen. And I knew probably the architectural thing that was most important to me was that it was event driven. But I knew that that was going to be difficult in the traditional relational model. And I knew that we honestly just didn't know enough about the problem that we could simply say, oh, well, like, we'll divide it up this way and this model will be correct. I mean, the risky nature of startups, the risky nature of early product development, the reality that we were going to have to ingest like a massive amount of data along the way. I did some back of the envelope calculations today. Like, with our current tag population, which is quite small, like, we deal with 15 million tag readings a day. It's a massive wall of data that comes at you. And so what I wanted was something that was going to be flexible enough to move with us. And when I looked at MongoDB, like, the first thing that I said, well, like, you can, particularly through Atlas, just get a cluster, stick it on your cloud environment. Like, you're not tied to a decision of Azure, AWS, or GCP. You've got a cloud environment where you can make that decision as you need, but that you're going to get a model that moves with you and allows you to understand how things are, so that you can drive the event architecture properly without necessarily having to be committed in a way that was going to mean a lot of rework for the developers.
So there's a lot here. This is really good. So the first track that you kind of elaborated on was, you said, hey, I've actually worked a lot with SQL, Oracle, BI. I know that world. And pretty quickly, you knew that wasn't a great option for you all, and that kind of more tabular relational model, simply because you knew that it wasn't going to make sense to have to pick a schema, stick to it. You needed the flexibility. You needed the agility of, the MongoDB document model, the way that data is structured in MongoDB gives you that ability to change on a dime. If a customer needs, a different feature, you can make the change. It doesn't break the model. So that was one big piece that I heard there that gave you the flexibility and probably some, I would hope, developer gains, right? You're able to build a little bit quicker, iterate a little bit quicker. The second part that I heard was around the Atlas side. So that's our MongoDB fully managed service, and the things that you talked about there of being able to spin up a cluster. It's super fast. You're not sitting around trying to provision and configure things. It's just done, and you can put it where you need it, and you move quickly, and you save some of that overhead. You had a other subtle point when you were talking about Atlas that I'd love to get your perspective on, which was you're not tied to a cloud provider per se. You can use the one that you want, your choice. Did that play any role in your comfort level in MongoDB Atlas, or selecting it, or is it just kind of a nice to have?
That definitely played a role. Certainly when I arrived, we hadn't made the commitment to Microsoft at that point. And, as an aside, I would say good things about Microsoft. It's been a really beneficial relationship for us working with Microsoft and Azure. But like, I have worked with AWS, I have worked with GCP, and I guess Azure was the one that I hadn't worked with coming into it. So, yeah, like, had it all gone horribly wrong, like, what would I have said? Like, I would have said, well, I want to be able to protect the data between whichever cloud provider I want to be on. I don't want to be tied into the bottom of something that I can't get out of. Because, and as well, I think probably, particularly when you talk about that cluster piece of Atlas, like, the reality is that cluster administration for a startup like us is wasteful work. Like, it's undifferentiated heavy lifting. We're not solving the customer's problem. We're not moving anything on. We're focusing development time on the wrong thing. So for you to be able to pay money and just make that problem go away, like, let's just, yeah, why wouldn't you?
It's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned another piece that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of threw a little brag stat out there, the 50 million tag readings per day.
15,
and
15.
Oh, 15.
Yeah.
Got you. 15, but soon 50.
Sure.
But it does bring me to a topic that you have a significant amount of your product is what we would consider an IoT solution. And so anytime we hear IoT, we hear, or, we see the need for scale, we see the need for availability. I'm curious to just get your take from an IoT perspective. What kind of requirements did that drive? And was MongoDB also a great fit for this as well? Like, can you tell me a little bit about how those marry each other?
IoT is interesting. It's a term a lot like cloud, that it's a very broad term, but certainly in our world, the devices themselves are super simple, right? Like, you're talking about a less than $10 device. It doesn't have memory or not like a lot of memory. Like, the memory I think is still measured in kilobytes. So you're talking about a very constrained computing device. You need to get the data off it quickly, and then you need to be able to throw the data somewhere else where you don't have to worry about it, but then can subsequently analyze it. And one of the other things that you're going to say about IoT, particularly in our world, is that the data doesn't stop. It's not like a website where you can say, well, between 9 and 5, like, all our users come on and use the website. It goes 24/7 by 365. There's no pause. And I often talk about it being this drumbeat, like there's just this consistent thump of data. Those tags talk every second. For some of the stuff that we're starting to do, which is more safety critical, you have to have all the packets. You can't not have a packet, because if you don't have the packets, then you can't reassemble the history of what happened and whether or not that was a good or bad thing to have happened. And so working with databases that cluster well, working with storage technologies that allow you to have that flexibility is super important. If you can come into a database technology that already has some support for clustering and already has support for, differentiated reads and writes within the cluster, and kind of the ability to tune some of those performance dials, that makes a big difference in how hard you have to work as an application developer on things like resilience.
So that seems like a common theme. It's this: how do we not have our really important engineers, development talent focused on, undifferentiated labor, right? And so that plays out in a lot of different ways, not recreating the wheel, I guess I would say, and, being able to do that through native scalability, native availability, those types of things that Atlas gives you has been really helpful. I guess just to kind of bring it all together, we've talked about the document model gives you some flexibility. You're able to make changes faster. You can ingest all these different types of data points, because I would imagine they're not always the same with all of these different devices. It's, you're getting all kinds of stuff thrown at you. The steady drumbeat you talked about, leveraging a managed service so that you're not doing that undifferentiated work. When you put it all together and you think about how this has allowed you to create a really great solution and product for customers, what are some of the results that you have in terms of impressive product features, things that you talk about with customers that help you win more customers? How would you classify some of those?
The things that you're talking about with customers, like, you're trying to give the customers, again, who come from an environment where technology is not a big part of their world, and that's changing very rapidly. Like, we're not the only construction tech company by a long chalk. So there's this wave of innovation that is coming in, and part of my job is to give people confidence that they're making the right decision, and to say, well, if you work with Ynomia, what you're going to get is you're going to get people who understand and appreciate the technology decision, people who care about what's going on, and people who are flexible enough to move with you as you go on this journey. So again, like, for our customers, that ability to be able to say, well, like, we can spin it up anywhere in the world. Like, you're in, construction projects don't just occur in Melbourne, they occur all across the world. So, like, being able to say, well, we can spin up a cluster in the UK, or we can spin up a cluster in the US as required, gives customers confidence that you can help them, and that you're not sentencing them to the latency and the the lag of having to send all their data to Australia or deal with things like GDPR easily. So there's a bunch of things there. And when we can talk about 50 million reads a day, you know that you're dealing with a technology partner in us and, of course, Mongo through us, that is going to do the right thing by you. Is going to be able to take the strain of this wall of data that's coming at people.
The wall of data frightens me, just to be clear.
Again, that 15 million reads, that comes out of I think about 11,000 tags.
Wow.
And you can say, well, on a building, you might be talking about, 3,000 or 4,000 facade panels. Then if you add to that plant and equipment or bins or a few other bits and pieces, you're rapidly getting into this thousands and thousands of tags, talking all the time, every day. We do some work with concrete, and the devices that go inside the concrete are there every 15 minutes because they're expected to last for a lot longer period of time, but they're collecting every 15 minutes, and that data builds up over the 3 or 4 years that they're expected to live.
Wow. Switching gears a little bit, and we have a all Sydney-based team for one of our products, MongoDB Charts. I'd be remiss if I did not bring this up with you. I know that this was also a part of your exploration and your checking in on MongoDB when you were making that decision. Are you guys using Charts now, thinking about using Charts? Anything to share there on that front for the Sydney team?
We were really impressed with the conversation about Charts, and I'm probably a shout out to you folks for bringing your product folk down to talk to us. The reality with Charts for us is that it's an ability for us to quickly visualize data and to quickly get an idea of where we're going. It saves us having to build more expensive tools, both internally and externally, to examine our data. As we as a startup go through this journey of what are we doing and how are we doing it, there's a lot of stuff that we're finding out along the way of how we slice and reslice our data. I'd probably also say we've been using the Stitch technology. We have that hooked to some of our critical collections so that we can monitor that just with a little webhook back to our Slack channels. But things like that make a difference, right? Because you can, again, you're focusing on the business problem. You're not focusing on the kind of technology layer to enable that business analysis to occur.
It makes a lot of sense. So, Rob, as we draw near the end here, I just, wanted to thank you for being so open with us, sharing your experience with MongoDB, Atlas, Charts, some of the other features you talked about, Stitch, which we now call Realm, by the way. No, all good. We just announced it. But look, hey, in reality, it's inspiring to watch what you guys are doing in such a fast amount of time. And I can speak on behalf of the whole ANZ team. We're excited to not just watch, but be a part of that journey as you reshape an industry that desperately needs a little love. And you guys are doing that. And it's just a really neat thing to see. Is there anything that you think I missed, we didn't talk about, that you think is important? And then I'm actually going to cheat. I have one last question that I'll ask after that. But just anything that comes to mind, or do you think we hit all the points?
I think we hit the main points. I mean, if you kind of end up recapping, right? There's that, don't recreate the wheel, and don't do undifferentiated heavy lifting piece. Pick technology partners that save you from spending time that you shouldn't spend solving the problem. Picking technologies that roll with the punches. Deviating just for a quick moment, we actually accidentally dropped our staging database last week or the week before. We misconfigured our test run, and then when we ran our tests, accidentally reset the staging database. But again, being able to have a technology where you can just hit the button and restore something rather than have a massive restore procedure was that's a big deal. And again, you're looking for things that make it easy to to be there. Make it easy to focus on the top line of your business problem. And anything that you can do to make your job simpler, whether or not that's like particularly in the event sourcing kind of realm, thinking about how you put together the data and how you reference the data. Like Mongo's been helpful for us in terms of not having to deal with some of the relational challenges there. It keeps our cost of change small, which is really helpful for us.
That's great. You actually read my mind, because my last question was going to be, what advice do you have for any companies, whether it's a startup or an established company that's going after these same kinds of challenges that you've described: flexibility, scale, not recreating the wheel, a managed service? And I was going to say, what advice would you have for people in similar situations? But I think you answered it, right? So that's perfect. Hey, Rob, this was really great story. And thank you for the time. We really appreciate you sharing that with us today, and wish you all the best in the world.
No worries. Thank you very much for your time.